I'm gonna change completely the topic to talk you about the different mechanisms to encapsulate Angular views. When I refer to encapsulating views, I mean in which way the styles of a component are isolated from the rest. Angular provides three different mechanisms to encapsulate the styles of a component. Emulated encapsulation, that is the default one used, native encapsulation, and the option to not encapsulate components at all. To understand the difference between them, I'm gonna create two more timer components. So I'm gonna duplicate my timer folder, copy, I paste it on the same level, here paste, and I'm gonna change the name to timer native. I open the component and replace the name to prevent collisions with the original one. So I modify here in selector, there's gonna be app timer native, and this is gonna be called timer native component. Of course, I want to use here the native encapsulation, so I add here encapsulation in the component metadata. This will be view encapsulation native. Of course, I have to import it, and I'm going to repeat the same procedure, copy folder, paste on the same level, and I rename the folder to timer none because I'm not going to use encapsulation here. I open the component, and in this case the selector is not going to be app timer native, but it will be app timer none, and of course timer none component. And in this case encapsulation will be none. Remember I told you there are three types of encapsulation. We can use emulated, but this is the default, the one we're using in timer, so it's the one used if you don't write anything. However, in this case we're going to use encapsulation none. Of course I have to add the new components to the main module. So I open app module TS, and here in declarations I add timer native component and also timer none component. And of course I have to import both. I import the timer none and the timer native. Now Angular is aware of those components, so I can use them in my app component HTML. I'm going to modify the last two app timers. So the first one will be app timer native, and the other one will be app timer none. You can forget about those red lines. They are caused because of the language service of Angular, that is a plugin to autocomplete on the template side using the component properties written in TypeScript. This tool is not recognizing the newly imported components, but don't worry, they're working. So anyway, I haven't touched the styles, but I can see in the results that there are some differences between those components. The most obvious is that the first timer is wider. This is not related with encapsulation changes, but it's caused because on the main view there are some styles for the app timer component. That's the reason why here we are applying some styles that we are not applying on the others. Despite this, the most important thing is that the third component has lost completely these styles. In fact, I can remove completely the styles of this component, timer none component, I remove this stuff, and if I go to see the result, I have exactly the same thing, so it's definitely not applying the styles of the component. This is caused because if you don't use view encapsulation, and in the case of this component we are using view encapsulation none, then you cannot use the pseudo-selector host that we were using here previously. Besides that, if I inspect the first timer, right-click, inspect, this element have an attribute underscore nghost hyphen and some alphanumeric code like this C1, and this attribute is not used by any other component. You can see the other components don't have this underscore nghost C1. This is what Angular does to emulate encapsulation. Look at those CSS. The component styles are being applied to any element with this attribute. Look here, those nghost C0 and C1 are encapsulated styles for different elements of my view. This way, Angular makes sure that those specific styles apply only to this specific component, because the styles are only applied to the component that have that attribute. In the case of app timer native, we don't have that attribute, but we have something different. If I show the content, there's this shadow root stuff. I click to open, and inside I can see that there's the component and also several style tags. There are browsers like Google Chrome that support Shadow DOM in a native way. Those browsers implement an API that allows JavaScript to create a brand new DOM for this component, and in this case Angular is using this API. As you can see, it copied the styles of all the other views. Thus from here, for example, they do not belong to this element app timer native, but belong to the first component. but anyway the styles from the views are copied in case you need them inside your component. And then finally the styles from the own component are also copied, as you can see here. The interesting thing here is that the styles from your own component will never move outside of AppTimer native, and because of that the other components will not be aware of those styles, so they cannot modify other elements of the application, getting similar results with what we have seen with emulated encapsulation. Finally we have encapsulation none. Okay, I can use the host CSS pseudo class selector, but also, as I am not having any kind of shadow DOM, any style that I add to this component will be shared with the rest of the view, affecting other components. Let's put it on practice. I'm gonna open the styles from my original timer. Here, timer component SCSS, and at the end, outside host, I will add a class buttons with some border 4 pixels solid gray. So I save it and I'm gonna see the results. As you can see, the border only appears on the first timer in the element with the class buttons. And this is because, thanks to the emulated encapsulation, I have this anti-condency1 attribute here that prevents this style to affect all the components. So my other components in their class button do not have this border I have just created. Even in the case of creating this class outside my host selector. Remember, host only apply inside the element, but I have created this buttons class outside, so we can think it will affect other components, but this don't happen thanks to the encapsulated emulation. Okay, more examples. I copy this border here to add it to the timer native, and I will change the color so I can see the difference between them. I change it for dark gray. Back to the results. I can see that this other gray is only applying also to the second component, so it has not overgraded the first one, neither the third one. And that's because this style has only been defined inside the private DOM of this AppTimer native element. Let me show you. I can inspect the element, you can see the class buttons here, I can click to go to the style sheet, and it highlights me one fragment of the shadow DOM. This style is defined here, by the end of this style sheet. Okay, let's change now the styles of the component that is not using shadow DOM. So I open the SCSS of timer none, and at the end of the document I'm gonna add something similar, but instead of this border I'll leave the class a background color, and this background color will be light gray. So I save, back to the view, and what happened? As you can see, all the components have this background, besides I only created on the last component. So in this case, the changes I made to the class buttons inside my component AppTimeNone in fact are affecting the whole DOM. Because this component is not encapsulated, the component styles are affecting to each and every one of the components. Now you know the differences between all the encapsulating options that Angular offers. Let me go back to the code and remove all those changes that were made only to explain this concept. So I get the folder timerNone, I remove it, folder timerNative, exactly the same. I go to app module and remove those changes. And also in the HTML, I undo those changes to have 3 app timers of the same type. Finally, I also remove this border in timer component SCSS. Back to the results, the view updates, and now I have 3 identical timer components.